Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. How are all of you guys doing? I'm doing well, just so you know. And I come in with another very amazing person, Kamran Pasha. I was so excited when I came across him on Facebook, and I feel like let's have him introduce himself. Because every time I get introduced by people, I feel a little weird because sometimes they subtract a few things from like my introduction, and sometimes they add some things that I have got to do nothing with. So I really just want to hear from the guest, and then I think we can pretty much start off this interview.
Perfect. So Rahim, thank you for having me on your channel today. It's a delight. If you my quick background quickly is I'm Kamran Pasha. I'm a filmmaker and a novelist in Hollywood. I was born in Pakistan. I was born in Karachi, North Nazimabad, and immigrated to the United States when I was 3 years old. And so I've been back to Pakistan many times. And yes, and now I work in the film industry. When I started, I came about 20 years ago. When I started, there were very few Pakistanis or Muslims in the industry. Now there's more, but it's not an easy industry for people of our community. So
Yeah, that is true. But now I think I wouldn't say like Pakistanis in general, but just like people from India, Bangladesh, Pakistanis from Nepal. They're just like now that they're coming up, and I feel like we were talking backstage, and I was going on. But my favorite show, like Never Have I Ever, it's based on an Indian girl.
mhm.
They're in Los Angeles. Now, this is amazing. And I feel like there's more, and we'll talk more about filmmaking because I watch a lot of films and watch a lot of TV shows. So yeah, I mean, like film critiquing or like film, like sort of reactions and stuff
Mhm.
could be a thing that I actually end up doing. So, which
Why
I
not that?
always have wanted to because I watched more than 100 Bollywood movies that I
Okay.
counted like last year. So it's probably more now, but
Would you watch modern movies or some of the classic ones with like Dilip Kumar and Madhubala and the
no,
old
no, no, no,
ones?
not like that. Most of them are like nowadays films. I watch like sometimes like Hum Aapke Hain Kaun and those sort of things as well. But I'm more into like rather than art cinema than like the mainstream films because again, I understand the mainstream ones are for more of the audience that they like to see something sweet and something that is nice and like a big production put on for like the art cinema or people that are amazing, amazing people working in the industry.
Mhm.
That's some of the like the real content, which I only get to watch like a weird little of it because while I'm a huge binge watcher, and I'd like to become a professional there. I still have to get to the IMDb ratings and the parent guide. Have to WhatsApp that to my dad. There's a huge process to when I am finally approved to watch a film. My dad has to go through that, but I understand how like
Then good.
it's
Then he's
always a
being a good
concern.
dad. He's being a good dad. We're in a world that's not a great world right now, and especially in the country that I live in, the United States, parents are very disconnected from their children, and it's not a healthy thing. So it's good their parents are connected.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is true. And I feel like it's nice. Sometimes they could be just like too connected, but that's something that's just how I feel. And I feel like sometimes I do take it like super for granted. But yeah, they're awesome. They're super nice to old people that live with me, give birth to me. So let's learn more about your childhood. I mean, you moved to the United States pretty young, so I mean, you are Pakistani American, I would say, at this point,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
three
I
years
mean, I
old. You
speak
moved.
Urdu. I speak Urdu, and my home is very Pakistani. Here in Los Angeles, I still take care of my mom, and and she still makes me incredibly good Pakistani food. So yeah, I mean, the culture is very much a part of my life.
Hmm.
So yeah, so my childhood is like I said, I was born in North Nazimabad, L Block, I believe it was, and I do have vivid memories of childhood in Karachi, and it was such a fun and open world back then in the early 70s. And then we immigrated to the US, and I grew up there, which being someone who is a Muslim in the United States, certainly at that time
Hmm.
was a bit challenging because there was a great deal of anti-Muslim bigotry that was part of the culture. It was part of the films, and it's part of what you watched on TV. And you grow up in that, and suddenly you begin to become very aware of who you are. And one of the things that I've experienced is, I went to college in the United States. I went to Dartmouth, which is a very nice school, and there were a lot of people from Pakistan, like affluent people who had who were from sort of the upper classes of Pakistan who were studying there too. And it was interesting because I was more in touch with my Pakistani heritage than they were. Many of them were more interested in pretending to be British, right? And that cultural element. And so, and they were quite offended to see someone like myself who had, who was raised here, as they would call us ABCDs, American-born confused Desis. I was like, but we're more in touch with who we are than these people who were definitely confused about who they were. So it was an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, that is true. And, it's very sad to see that people that live here in Pakistan, and us in general, we just want to move to Canada or Australia or the United States or anybody. And we do not appreciate the culture that we have. Now, United States has a mix of cultures. But they're the people, now you know how it is to be connected to the country far away, because that is how you were raised. For me, it's like a normal thing. I want to get out of here and all that. But now that I feel I'm connected to the world and I'm global, it's only with that sort of a mindset and that sort of a network will you be able to realize what you have is gold. What you have is gold. Don't run after that silver. What you have is amazing. So I
Well,
feel like sometimes
certainly where we are in America right now. I mean, I think, I've lived in this country now since 1976, and so about 50 years almost, and it's a country that has actually devolved in culture in my lifetime, and become a place where it's a very confused society right now, and it's not in a very healthy place as a culture. And so I think many Pakistanis and many people from the subcontinent that dream that this is a fantasy land they're escaping to, discover that their home countries still have viable cultures and viable families, which is something America doesn't have right now.
yeah, I mean, interestingly, my cousin is flying from New York to here in like I think a few hours. So, I mean, I feel I have so many people that are abroad, and I understand how they are because when they come here, they feel pampered. They feel like they're the king of the world because the thing there is that you've got to work on your own. You don't have any mates. You've got to drive and you've got to make a living off your own because, well, nobody really cares if you're your daddy's child or anything, unless you're the super elite of the country, of course. But here, you've got a maid, even if you are, middle class. You've got housekeepers, you've got butlers and stuff. You've got drivers if you are a little, upper middle class, a little above there. So I feel like we often take this for granted a lot. But I've always wanted
Not
to.
normal in America. It's not normal in America, and the middle class in
Yeah.
America is largely disappearing. I mean, this country is largely a very small group of incredibly wealthy people, and a large group of people that are just struggling and suffering. And so, I think many Pakistanis and many people from the subcontinent just don't appreciate what they actually have.
Yeah, that is true. And of course, we're two different like economies, just to say, not to make it boring, who's saying the word economy, but we're two different economies. That's true. Now, I've always wanted to ask you, like somebody, this because I remember the first time, or like my first cinematic memory. What was yours? Do you have like a memory of watching a film, or what is your first like filmy
I,
memory?
I have a very vivid memory. We had just immigrated from Pakistan. I was just learning to speak English from primarily watching cartoons. I must have been about 4 years old, and there was a movie, a classic Hollywood movie with Charlton Heston, The Ten Commandments, where he plays Moses, right? And every April during Passover in America, they played on network television, and so we had, like I said, I've just arrived maybe in America just a few months and was just beginning to understand English. And I was a little child, and we had our little apartment in New York and a little TV set. And my dad put on Ten Commandments. It came on. So that's the first movie I ever saw. I would see movies later in the theater. It's the first movie I ever really saw. And I sat there and I was just blown away. I'd never seen anything like it. This is like a 1950s Charlton Heston film, but even then, it just took me to another world. Watching the Red Sea open and all the miracles of Moses fighting Pharaoh and all those things, and I remember my heart was beating just in wonder of all of it, and not just the cinema of it, which was and still is great cinema, but also the spiritual message. You're 4 years old, you don't think about religion or anything anything like that. And I remember vividly after the movie was over, I turned to my father and I asked him, what is God? Because you just, again, you're a little child, you don't think about it. You hear Allah, inshallah, all the day, but none of it means much to you as a little child. And so I remember this. My father took me on his lap and he said something that has always stayed with me. He said, God is the light of the universe, and Moses saw one ray of that light. And so that's a very profound statement, and it struck me very deeply that I remember it. I can describe the room to you, what it looked like, and the walls. It stayed with me because not only it did two things at that moment. It filled me with a love for cinema, which has now guided my career and become my career, and it also filled me with my spiritual journey, because I'm very proudly Muslim. I'm very proud. I'm a Sufi. I'm part of a Sufi tariqa, and all of that journey began at that moment from that movie, and then my father's comment about God, and so that put me on a very unique path. So I gotta thank God for that experience.
That is super cool. I mean, this is more of a conversation than an interview, just saying. But I also will answer my own questions.
I would love
So,
to hear it.
uh, my first cinematic memory, of course, there's songs that I like vaguely remember listening to. Now that my parents play it on, and like this song used to dance to as like a 3-year-old, and I'm like, I don't remember anything. That's just embarrassing. You're always embarrassed with it when you're like in your teenagers. Uh, my first memory of watching a film was Chennai Express that came out in, I think, 2012 or 2013. And I was about 5, 6 years old when I watched it. But that was the first movie that my parents let me watch alone, because they'd always be on my, like, literally on my, like, looking over my shoulder, and they'd be like,
Good.
oh my
Good for
God.
that.
And then, with that, they were like a little more okay with it. I love that. I think it has really then put forward to many films that I watched. I went on super crazy, but I feel like at this point in time, and my first ever like concern was when I came into social entrepreneurship and everything, was like creating something for meaningful for children, or meaningful, because see, one's animation films, and children at some point in time, they're like, this is baby stuff, and they're that sort of age where they're not going to go all in and start watching Sacred Games or something, and they're not at that age that they're going to start watching Rapunzel, but then they're at that age where anything that they watch is going to shape them. And that is from about 8 to 14, 16 years old. That was, the target market. And I felt like creating content for that market is super important.
It is.
I mean, my dad let me watch Sanju when I was 12 years old. And I tell that to somebody, I believe you watched it, probably. But my dad, I tell people he let me watch a story of a Bollywood actor that was huge, and was a drug addict, and it's an 18 plus rating. Um,
Mhm.
but of course, we skipped some parts. But he watched it with me, and
Mhm.
that's the best movie of my life. So I feel like when parents, they emphasize on importance of the entertainment that you watch, and when they do not treat you like a baby, and if there is something they skip it or something, I feel like it makes you feel more grown up. So at that point in time, I would go on and brag to everybody that, oh my God, I saw it. Oh my God, I saw it. I saw the movie. um, but how did you quite come into filmmaking, like Hollywood? I understand this is a thought of like possibly 14, but when you hit like 15 and stuff, you're like, how can I go into Hollywood? Like, there's no chance. You just come into that sort of life, to what I've seen around me. But how was it for you?
Well, like you, I thought there was no chance either. In fact, another memory I have from childhood. Again, same time when I was a little boy, I was watching an American sitcom with my older sister. So I must have been maybe 6 or 7 at the time, and my sister would have been 8 or 9 at the time. And I remember watching this television show, and I remember this. I turned to my sister and I said, "I'm going to go do that someday." I mean, that I was going to go work in Hollywood. And I was going to write TV and movie. And my sister said to me, that's not possible for people like us. You know, even at the age of 8 or 9, she said, that's not, we don't get to do that. You know, our people don't get to do that. And like everyone else, I believe that to be true. And so I never thought that was a possibility. You know, as certainly of my generation, I think it continues on into your generation. There was a lot of pressure to go into the medical fields in our culture, doctor, engineer, and I didn't ever have any interest in those fields. I had no skill in those areas, but I was always a very good writer, and I was always a very artistic person. And so, you know, I thought, well, I'm good with words, so I'm gonna go make a career out of that. So after college, I worked for a few years as a journalist in Wall Street. I was working for some financial publications, but I also got to do a lot of international news. And, you know, I actually interviewed Benazir Bhutto once, you know, and so it was an interesting experience. And then after that, I went back to graduate school. I got a law degree and an MBA. So I got all these degrees. And I thought I was going to become a lawyer because that's what you do with my skills that I could communicate, because lawyers, that's their skill is that. And I was bored. I was bored out of my mind. It's not what I wanted to do with my life. And I was suddenly felt trapped. I was, you know, in these expensive graduate school programs, and now I'm being funneled down a path of my life that I don't really want to go to, but I've done this to myself because I didn't think anything else was possible. And it was actually an accounting class in business school where I was bored. I couldn't figure out the spreadsheet in the accounting. I was like, what am I doing here? And out of boredom, I started writing my first screenplay. It was just a teen horror movie. I just wrote it to entertain myself. I bought a book on how to write a screenplay, and I just wrote the screenplay in business school. And then I graduated. I was working for a big law firm in New York City, and I was bored. I was not happy. But I said, well, I still have this screenplay that I wrote. Maybe I can do something with it. So I just started sending out emails and letters to agents. Agents are the people that sell your material to Hollywood. I didn't know any, and I didn't have any connections. I would just send these unsolicited emails or letters to these big agencies, and most didn't respond. Or some would send a little thank you card saying thank you, but we don't accept submissions from people we don't know. And then I forgot about it. But then a few months later, one of the people that I had sent an email to responded saying, hey, you know what? Send me your script. I don't know who you are, but just send it to me. He read it, and then he calls me and says, this is a great script. This is a really great script. Because he said, I was shocked because most people I don't know send me something. I can't get to the first 3 pages. And said, this is a great script, and I'd like to represent you. And I was like, really? Okay. And I'm still working 80 hours a week as a lawyer. And he put me in touch with some producers, and I pitched them an idea, and they're like, that's a really, really good idea. Can you write a synopsis for it? I got so excited that these producers, it was actually a director that I was talking to, his big directors, that he would be interested in just hearing my idea. So instead of writing the synopsis or the summary of the idea, I got very excited. I wrote the whole script in one weekend because I don't have a lot of time. I'm working full time as a lawyer. I just had my weekend, Saturday and Sunday, free. So I spent all weekend just locked up, and I wrote an entire script from scratch. And on Monday, I give it to him, and he's like, what is this? I said, this is the idea I told you about on Friday on the phone. He said, you must have been working on this for a few months. I said, no, I just wrote it this weekend. He said, nobody can write a screenplay in a weekend, and it can't be good. I said, okay, well, I'm sorry. And he reads it, and a few days later, he calls me, this is incredible. How did you write the script in the 2 days? And he sold it to Paramount Pictures. And suddenly I get this very large check in the mail, and I couldn't believe it. And then I get flown out to LA, and I meet some more producers there, and I sell another one. And I was like, wait a minute, I can do this? It literally was the will of God. I mean, I had no idea I could do this. And then I had this what I thought was going to be a difficult conversation with my family, because my parents were retired and I'm supporting them as a nice Pakistani boy working at a law firm and making good money and paying their mortgage and all of that. And I said to my mother, I said, I think I'm going to move to LA and try the screenwriter thing. And that would mean quitting my job as a lawyer. And once you leave the legal field, it's very hard to return to it, And so it's not the kind of thing that once lawyers see that you left it for a couple of years, they're like, oh, you're not committed to this profession. And then you really can't get back into it. So I'm taking a big risk to here. I still have all this debt from graduate school. And if this doesn't work, then I'm going to be in big trouble. And also because it's an unstable career, I knew that. I don't know how I'm going to be able to continue supporting my parents and how they're relying on me to pay the mortgage and things like that. They're retired. And then, how mothers are, my mother looked at me, she goes, well, I always knew you were going to do this. So what do you mean you always know? She said, when you were a little boy and I'd be making food in the kitchen, you would come up to me and you would tell me movies. Like you would make up stories with characters while I'm cooking, and the whole movie would make sense. It would be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it would be an entertaining movie. And I'm cooking, and I'm just listening to your movie story that you're making up. She said, I always knew you were going to do this. I'm glad you figured it out. And then she said, go to Los Angeles, trust God, trust Allah. He will pay our bills while you're doing that. And I moved to LA in 2001. And now it's been 20 years that I've been doing this professionally. I write for television, I write for movies, I published a few novels. I haven't worked in law in 20 years. I haven't had a stable career outside of Hollywood in 20 years. This is what I do.
That's so cool. That's like that is, I mean, I think there should definitely be a movie on that, just like but would you want to tell us like the film, what film was it, like the one that you sold, the first one that was to Paramount?
Yeah, it was actually an episode for a television series that was before your time, because it's 2001, so I don't think you were around. But it was a show that was on a network that existed in those days called UPN, and it was a time travel show called 7 Days. And the idea was that the government had a time machine that if something like September 11th or something horrible happens, they could send one government agent back 7 days in time to prevent that from ever happening. And so that was a show on television, and the director that I was talking to had directed episodes of that show. That's why I pitched him some ideas, and it was a Paramount show. Paramount produced that show. And so I just pitched him an idea for that show, and it was about someone attacks the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and causes a big war between the Muslims and the Israelis, and then this agent goes back in time to prevent that from happening. And that was the idea I pitched him, and that's what I wrote, and that's what they bought. They never actually filmed that. I think they got scared of actually filming. It was a little too controversial for them, Muslims and Israelis and all this other stuff. And so, but then they hired me to write another script for the show, which premiered, and then after that, my first full-time job in the industry was on the Twilight Zone remake that was on in 2002, 2003 with Forrest Whitaker was the host of that. And that was my first full-time job working on the Twilight Zone, which was one of my favorite shows as a child. And now it was being redone. And and away I went from there.
That's so cool. Now, first thing I want to ask you, there's a lot of, at this point in time, there's a lot of shows, and I mean, I hate to say it, but they, at this point in time, an Indian kid or a Pakistani kid is a must-have in, the supporting cast. Mm-hmm. You need to have, whenever you see a show, there's always like an Indian kid somewhere around the background or something. Mm-hmm. But now is it happening that Muslim characters or the American Eid that's coming out? Mm-hmm. I actually, funnily enough, I was actually going to go in with a role. Okay. But I actually didn't. I didn't. I talked to the director over email, but then I decided not to. I don't know why. I'm just going through a very teenagey sort of phase. And I'm like, I don't want to do it. But now I see it's actually turned into something. It's like the American Eid, or there's many, representations from, the subcontinent, or there's leads. How do you feel now as, first being, or being said to that, you can never go there because of, because we're brown, or because we're from Pakistan, or because we're Muslims, or there's so many things you could just add in. But how does it feel now to have that sort of representation there in series or in, different entertainment categories now?
Well, I'm happy to see representation increasing, period. The problem is that the people making the stories are often just doing representation for PR purposes. They're not necessarily caring about the people, the cultures that they're representing, and often you'll find them doing very stereotypical kinds of portrayals. The challenge when someone's an actor, I'm glad actors, especially subcontinental actors, are getting more and more roles, as you said. But the problem is the actors don't control the scripts. They're given a role, you say these words, and unless they're Will Smith and very powerful, they don't really have the ability to argue about it and say, I don't want to say this, I don't want to do it this way, right? They just ask, that's their job. And so if the people who are writing and directing these projects are the ones that determine the narrative, And in the last 20 years that I've seen, we have certainly seen an increase in representation, but I have not seen a change in the mindset of those people. There is still, I should differentiate. And I know you have fans and viewers from all over the subcontinent and of the world, but there is a difference in the sense that Hollywood is comfortable with Indian characters and Hindu characters, and they're very comfortable with them. They're not comfortable with Muslim characters. They're making more of them now, but there's a profound discomfort because Islam is still seen as a very threatening religion for the power structure of Hollywood, whereas other religions are not seen as a threat. And so when you see Muslim characters, they're often emasculated. They're often weakened characters, or they're not typical Muslim. Suddenly the character is gender fluid, which is not a common thing in the culture, right? But it's very common in how it's being portrayed in Hollywood. And so, because they're comfortable with that, a traditional Muslim, a more conservative Muslim, Pakistani, is something that's seen as very, very threatening in Hollywood. And because I am that, as someone who is a producer and a writer and a director, I can see directly when I've been in positions where I'm like, why are you making me do the character do that? That's not authentic to the situation. And they're like, well, it should be authentic, as in we want to change your culture, right? We want to make your culture more like ours, more progressive. And I fought that, and not always successfully. But so we have to be careful with when we talk about representation, because the industry is happy to do sleight of hand, where it makes you look at one thing so you don't look at the other. So you'll see an increase in diverse voices, or an increase in diverse faces, but not increase in diverse voices. The industry still has some political agendas, and it wants to shape how other cultures grow. And it's very uncomfortable with more traditional cultures, and it wants to change them. So there's agendas in that I am perhaps single-handedly fighting, because a lot of when I came to Hollywood 20 years ago, there were almost no Muslims in the industry at all. And now 20 years later, there's quite a few, but most of them are of a younger generation who are perfectly fine with the current social narratives that are being promoted by Hollywood. And they're perfectly fine, for changing Muslim cultures to reflect American values. That's a younger generation. And so they are the ones that the industry's like, that's great. This person's not a troublemaker, right? I'll give you an example. I was invited, a couple of years ago, I was invited. There was a new Muslim screenwriters group. Now, when I came to Hollywood, there was no Muslim screenwriters. So I was like, oh, great, I've been invited. And I came and met all these young people, like 20, 30 young people. I'd never even know who these people were, where they came from, but now they're working in the industry, and I was so delighted to meet them. And the very first thing, and the organizer was a young man I'd mentored, and I had a conversation with him about this afterwards. But the very first thing he said, well, let's all introduce ourselves and everyone give their gender pronouns. So to me, this whole gender fluidity and pronouns thing is something that is being imposed by white academics of this moment, and it's not something naturally coming out of our culture, certainly not coming out of Muslim cultures. So I said, why are we doing this? Why do I have to say he, him, they? Why is this necessary? But everyone else was comfortable with it. So Hollywood is very comfortable with that. Someone like myself, a more traditional Muslim, not comfortable. And what's problem for them is I've actually risen to a certain level of power. And so they can't actually control me. These younger kids, they can control, because these kids just want to break in the industry and want a job and will do whatever's asked of them. With me, I'm like, no, I'm not going to write that. That's not real. And that creates conflict.
Yeah, you're right. I hate to say it. Like no racism or anything. At this point in time, people, when they're to screen, there needs to be somebody that looks Chinese or Japanese or Korean or something. There needs to be a black kid. There needs to be a brown kid. There needs to be then a bunch of white kids. Okay. So then there's like, okay, we work on equality and we're symbolizing something. But I don't know whether you believe it or anybody else does or not. I believe in that Hollywood or any other film sort of industries or these films that are made, they symbolize something.
Sure.
And they would shape the future. They do, because the films that I watch, whether it be directly or indirectly, they give a message. They just do. Or they shape, or they shape the norms. Mm-hmm. Or they shape the norms. Like a few days ago, well, I wouldn't say a few days ago, some time ago, There was this very viral thing that went on, and it was this huge Netflix show apparently. I haven't seen it, Elite, and there was a Muslim character there, and the way that she's showing her freedom is taking off her hijab.
Yeah, that's a standard
That's
Hollywood
wrong.
trope. The moment you take, because she's always, there's the white boy she likes, and then finally the white boy gives her the courage to do this. I'm not wearing this anymore. And that's a standard trope in the industry because traditional Islamic culture and values is very threatening to this industry. And so they have to have that actress has to do that if she wants the job. She can't argue about the script.
That is true. So the thing, that is our main thing. The representation that we have as of now of Muslim characters is very different. Now, I see if you say, I hate to say brown characters or subcontinental characters, okay, yeah, it's going very nice. It's going super nice.
Yes, and
But
like I said, they don't
Muslim,
have a problem with other communities within the subcontinent. It's the Muslims within subcontinent that's troubling for the industry.
yeah, that's true. Now, the main thing is, if that's what we want, if that is what empowerment is, just don't put it there rather than put it in, putting it this way. That's the point.
Well,
I
again,
was offended when they did that because I'm like, although I do not wear a hijab, that's a other thing.
neither does my mom or my sisters, but they're fine with people that do, and it's not seen as something. What are you doing? You're oppressing yourself. So yes.
My mom does. My cousins do. My aunts, my grandmas, all of them. Ignore the voice in the background. All of them do. But the main thing is, it's not what's oppressing. It's empowering. There's a difference between
Well, there's
them.
a dignity and modesty, and there's and Hollywood is all about, female exploitation. And so modesty is not something that's considered, of value. And it's actually considered something that's irritating to Hollywood's objectives.
Yeah, and you even see like this celebrity or like the show business or whatever. You see that there's Muslims that are coming up. There's models that are Muslim, but they're not also the best representation.
Well, I mean, look,
the whole community.
you see, the ones that are getting prominent in Hollywood right now of Muslim origin, I'm using that word specifically for a reason, the ones you hear about in the industry all the time are people like the Indian Aziz Ansari, right? Or from Pakistan, Kumail Nanjiani, right? And both of these gentlemen are very prominent in Hollywood. They're very prominent, right? And at the same time, they've publicly come out and said, "Oh, I'm not Muslim anymore. I'm atheist," right? Because that's how they can survive the industry. Whether they are, I don't know what's inside of them. I don't know either of these gentlemen personally, but the fact that they have to say in interviews, "Yeah, my parents are Muslim. I'm not into any of that stuff. But not, that's fine to say I'm not practicing." It's literally, they'll go out and say I'm atheist. They have to really differentiate that they've left this thing behind. And I don't hear Hindu actors have to say, "I'm not Hindu anymore." I don't hear Christian actors have to say, "I'm not Christian anymore." Muslim actors who Hollywood embraces have to publicly say, "I am atheist." And that says something.
That is super true. And I'm saddened when I see a lot of people that are there and are Muslim or call themselves that I'm a Muslim model and all that. They wear a hijab and then they wear like a dress with a huge slit, and I'm like, but that's wrong.
Well, I mean, pick one or the other. Pick one or the other. Go with it. Pick one or the other. It's where we are. The industry, I often say this: Hollywood is Jahannam, and I'm not speaking metaphorically. There is a metaphysical darkness to this industry, despite all of its creation. Hold on, we're getting a little bit of background. Hold on one second. I'm going to mute it for a second.
Yeah, no problem. That happens. There's people coughing. There's people talking in the room as well. That happens. But yeah, you were very right. And then we did have a little limited time. And please stay after I stop recording the interview. But thank you so much for being on. And it was a pleasure having a conversation with you. And you're very right with all the things that you said, and always, with me at times I wouldn't really just say them, but like for the sake of being like problematic, but you actually went out and say them. And I'm not gonna hold back and put it on because it's the truth. The Muslim representation is pretty much threatened as of now, and the representation that they have, and the stuff they have, it's best not having them. Let's just put it there.
It's just, again, the agendas of the industry. The industry, the people that I work with are largely very secular atheistic people that have a materialist agenda, and they want other people to think like that, and so they use the industry for that purpose, which is unfortunate because, like I said, the industry, when it was just giving the audience what it wanted, it made movies like the Ten Commandments, and it made these wonderful spiritual movies because that's what the audience wanted. Now the industry is at a place where they're trying to tell the audience what it wants and trying to shape culture, and they're getting a lot of resistance as a result of that. And it's unfortunate because we're here to entertain people, and I think certain values are universal and they are part of the human condition, and we don't need to preach them to people. We don't need, if you have to convince someone, your ideas are not inherent to the human condition. And so if you have to preach through your TV movies, it's because people don't naturally think this way. And so I fight that battle here in Hollywood, and I'm sometimes a little bit the lonely crazy person doing it, but I'm doing it.
I'd love to join you there if you give me a chance.
You will. Inshallah, you will. Inshallah. Everything has a time. Obviously, alhamdulillah, you've accomplished a lot as a young woman. And so continue following your journey and see where it takes you.
Thank you so much, Kamran, for being on. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And it's been a pleasure to have you on. Please do stay back after I stop recording. I've got to say that a lot of times. But inshallah, we will do more sessions together because I feel like we advocate for a lot of similar things. And I think we can start a podcast or something to just get out our message. So, yeah, thank you so much.